Welcome back to Reimagine 2020. I'm Yonah Hochhauser, and today I'm glad to be joined by Luca Cosentino, DeFi lead at Oasis. Luca, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, likewise. Happy to be here. Hi, everyone.
Well, no, first off, can you tell our audience kind of who you are and how you got into blockchain?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So I lead DeFi at Oasis. Oasis is a SF-based company in the blockchain space. Happy to say more about what we're doing, but to say something about why I'm in blockchain. The story goes back to 2013 when I first started playing with Bitcoin for the first time without knowing what that was. I was in Europe at that time, and I saw this new thing like on the newspaper somewhere, like in bottom right corner of page 59. And I was like, what is this thing? Like, it seems interesting. I was 20 something in my early 20s at the time. And I was like, yeah, it seems interesting. I have no idea what I'm doing. I haven't invested any money so far, so I don't really know what that is. I didn't put too much thought into that because I asked around, and people were saying like, that's weird. I don't know. We know nothing. And maybe like the financial education that my parents received was always, if someone gives you more than 2%, you should be very scared because it's like they are probably a Ponzi scheme. And it's like, well, I don't know. Okay, I'll drop it. So like couple of years later, I went back into looking into those things, and I familiarized a little bit more with Ethereum and the idea of smart contracts without still going into the technical details. And in 2016 and 17, when I then moved to California for an MBA at Berkeley, I then spent a lot more time on the technical side. So I was part of a couple of groups that were analyzing papers, and reading white papers and trying to understand the differences between the different protocols. That was very, even if it was just 3 years ago, it's like a lot happened in this last 3 years. And then I had an idea, and I said, I've been working in product functions that had a lot to do with the way companies treat data and the way companies share and collaborate with data, either with external or internal partners. And I'm not really satisfied with the way companies handle that. I felt the pain of data managers, CTOs, whoever manages the data on those companies. And it's like, these policies make no sense to me, that an employee that joined the company yesterday applies to having access to 1 billion databases, just specifying whatever reason, and someone else in the world says yes, no, based on like one line of text, right? And if you look at incentive schemes, like the incentive of the data requester is always much bigger than the incentive of the person who approves. But anyway, I had this idea of saying like, hey, there has to be something with crypto that can help keep the data private, while still while not sacrificing the ability of actually using this data. And I literally Google like privacy preserving experts in crypto at Berkeley, and I stumbled upon one professor, and that professor now is the CEO of the company like Oasis Labs. So yeah, that's how I think it was a journey more than a single decision in my life, but it's been so fun so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the story that I constantly hear over and over. People just stumbling upon, first hearing about it in the periphery, then stumbling upon, the technicals, the white paper. The more they learned about how it works, the more they saw the potential. And you work for Oasis. There are a lot of projects out there, but the Oasis network is actually tackling, I think, something rather specific and something interesting. You want to go into what makes Oasis different from all the other blockchains?
Yeah, absolutely. So this goes back to, let's say, 16, 17, when I don't know, I can't remember the numbers, but the market was entirely Ethereum. I mean, Bitcoin, of course, but for the smart contract world, it was all about Ethereum. And some projects were growing in popularity for reasons that were really unclear at the time, right? There were many different angles that were pushing or lifting projects up. But when we looked at the market, we sort of thought that the system was not really designed for adoption of the current world, but everything was mostly designed, or seemed to be designed, for a slightly more aspirational internet or web in general, which is great because like scratching things and rewriting is probably like a very good and exciting strategy. But we also thought there was a more urgent need of bringing the blockchain principles to the real world. And we thought that the two big elements that were missing in that world at that point were the ability of not revealing all the information to everyone by default, and also like the need for scaling and the need for like supporting way more transactions, like the 13 transactions that Ethereum supported have nothing to do with like the 1700 that Visa supports. I mean, this is definitely not new narrative, but it's still there somehow. On the privacy side, the way we interpreted that, even if we saw a lot of privacy coins get into the market, we think that privacy is often mistaken with the ability of keeping the data private and secure, which is a completely different story. So Oasis, what it really do is we enable applications to keep the data public or private as they want. And when we say private, the idea is not really hiding information. Like privacy is not a concept of hiding information, but it's a concept of separating who has access to this information and who doesn't have access to this information. Now, the cool thing that we enable is that when you think of this trade-off between accessing the information and being able to do something with the information, and not accessing the information and essentially like not being able to do anything with this information, there is a third option that we bring, which is you can access the information, you can do your computation, but this data is not revealed. So there are complex mathematical techniques and a good combination of hardware and software on our network that enables this data to stay in this secure enclaves, that's how are called. The computation goes to the data rather than the other way around. And only the output of that computation is actually released.
Yeah, and I mean that's a really cool concept. It seems so simple, but it's so changes the whole way things work when you're bringing the computation to the data rather than the other way around. And this idea of data tokenization, where you're tokenizing data and then you're able to do a lot more. You're able to control it a lot better once you tokenize it. But in our minds, but the problem often that I find with blockchain is that when we try to find solutions or when we try to understand, solutions to problems, we look at the regular world, the traditional world, and then we try to, all right, so how do we do this with blockchain? And what I like about your project and a lot of other projects is that you're looking at how do we find solutions that only work with blockchain, that new solutions that we couldn't even think of otherwise. So, where does the full potential stand with this data? Like, I can understand, okay, I can monetize my data, I can control my data, but is there an idea is there something we could do with data when it comes to blockchain that like we wouldn't even think of, that we don't even know yet in the world today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I like that you pointed out this fact, because this is probably like the main conversation that we have daily at Oasis when we discuss use cases and when we discuss what features we need to build and what use cases we need to support. And I think one recurring theme is, yeah, privacy is interesting in a lot of places, but what are the use cases that would not be possible without the combination of privacy and blockchain? Now, when you think of data right now, the way we organize and structure data is in data sets, right? So there is a combination of columns and rows, and there are like individual data points that are useful in some cases or in aggregate, but there are just like tables that we have in mind, right? Even if clearly that there are some databases that are not based on tables, etc. But like, without making it too complicated, we have the structure of tables, right? And when we say a data set, it's often measured on two things. The first one is like the size of the data set, right? So 1 megabyte, 1 gigabyte, whatever, right? And the second one is the classification of the data, which is this abstract concept that has to be enforced by a policy on top of the data. But your system, your hardware, your laptop, or the cloud, like, don't really know what a sensitive data is over a non-sensitive data, unless, I mean, the way to do it is via policies, right? Something on top. Now, we try to like go a little deeper and think of, wait a second, how can we go down? How can we take the data and instead of expressing the data as a combination of data points in a data set that again is regulated by policies and size, we start attaching some properties to the data point itself, like to the atomic unit of the data, right? And so we started thinking, that's cool. Like, what if we can actually build this token, which is this sort of more material atomic representation of a data or a data point, or like some data, and we find ways to attach some information to the data that says how secure this data is, how relevant this data is, how important, what is the value, like what is the token that you and I can exchange, right? And so all of a sudden the data, from being this abstract like thing that it's hard to like share, if not in a data set, now becomes this tradable unit. And now the conversation is around how do we standardize these units in a way that you and I, when we say $1, we already know what that means. And we say like one data token, we already know what that means. And once we have this primitive, there's really like a billion things that can be done on top. You can think of risk profiling of how exposed you as a user are. If 22% of your bits are exposed to the internet, maybe your data is not safe, or maybe like 50% is the threshold, like no one knows at this point. So the idea on the data tokenization is taking what's in the industry now, which is this idea that you take an existing data point and you map it to an alternative string that doesn't represent that represents that data point but doesn't transfer the data itself. So moving from that idea that has the big downside of not being usable once it's tokenized, to an idea of like, okay, what if we can take a piece of data, we make it a token in a standardized format, and then we enable some protocols on top that help like exchange the data or like do something with data tokens. And if all this is possible, there are two positive effects. The first one is that you can encapsulate this data, and this is what is happening right now with the Oasis network. So you can encapsulate this data by user. So you, for instance, are a capsule, and you own this capsule that contains a set of data points, and you are the owner of that, and you have control over this capsule. So you can give access, you can give privacy preserving access, you can deny access, whatever you want. But the difference is that whoever comes to you will have to ask something to you, some permission. And the second they ask for your permission, they also need to attach an incentive for you to do that. And that incentive should actually be a payment, most likely. And if you do this whole process in a programmatic way, where the application that you're using on your phone already has specified policies, and they monetize your data, or both of you monetize that data, or only the user monetize that data, the collaboration models between the actual company, the actual application, and the user changes completely from an only trust-based like cooperation to an actually incentivized cooperation at both protocol and application layer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, people don't realize the potential, you know, not only to change, like people say, oh, because like now I'll control my data on social media and privacy. It's not only that, it could change the entire economic structure of the world economy. Because right now, if you look at the most valuable companies, you know, Google, Facebook, their value comes from them own or having or controlling our data. And that's not just, oh, it's not just, okay, it's a big market. It's the biggest market. And so if you're actually,
there's also, sorry to interrupt you. I wanted to say this, like, there's also an interesting aspect here when you say the value comes from the data. Yeah, for sure. This is absolutely true. When you also look at what that means, right? There is this behavior that changes, right? This is like the important piece of valuing the data differently on the two sides of this equation, which is on one end you have the users, on the other end you have the companies, is that it's not only a problem of the user not getting value, but the behavior of the company over time, the behavior of the platform over time changes completely from a more cooperative model where a company, in order to attract users, need to behave really well and need to behave in a very cooperative way with the users in order to attract them. But once a critical mass is reached, like the user is left basically with no power at all, and the company like shifts the model to a more, like, I don't know, selfish, I don't know what it, like, self-interested, I don't know what the word is, but like that results in a shift in behavior that essentially exposes users. And when we say user, we mean you and I, but also mean like applications that use services of a certain platform. They can really make the rules and they can really do whatever is best for themselves, exploiting value as much as possible, right? And within crypto, there is an entire wave of people who think that the biggest power of crypto is really enabling cooperative models that are based on incentives for everyone. And that's possibly the beautiful part and the biggest innovation of crypto. And we are trying to play a role in that by making the information available via these tokenized data sets, essentially, these data tokens.
And so do you see, I mean, because like in my mind, I mean, I could see a situation if we're talking about economic incentives and monetizing one's data to change even the behavior of these corporations. You know, at the end of the day, why do people want this data? They want to monetize this data. They want, you know, advertisers go to Facebook because they know that Facebook has such a wide, vast amount of data on a person that they have a pretty accurate picture of that person, of you know, what their interests are, what they want to buy. And so that data is very valuable to the advertiser because they could send targeted ads. So if right now Oasis and succeeds and puts the power of data, the control of data, the ownership of data into the user, and now the user can decide who they want to sell their data to. If data is only, if the data is most valuable when there's a lot of it, you know, we look at big data, the more data you have, the more valuable it is because it gives you a more accurate picture. So at the end of the day, won't we end up with a similar looking power structure where only the biggest corporations who can buy the largest amounts of data from you will have the most valuable data? So they'll be able to pay the, even, I don't even say the best price, they could even undercut their like, won't at the end of the day Google and Facebook still have access to the most data because they'll be able to afford the most data and they'll still be the most powerful player? I mean, yes, now the user will get money for it. They'll be able to monetize it where right now they're not monetizing it, but right now they're getting access to the free service. So once you're charging users once users are charging corporations for the data, the services will no longer be free. One has to imagine, because they're no longer selling their data for the use of the service. And Google and Facebook and these massive corporations that have the funds are going to be able to buy up access to all the data anyway. Will we actually see a shift in power dynamics?
So I think there is I think your point is extremely valid if you consider that from a super transactional marketplace, which is, yeah, I'm brutally interested in monetizing my data as a user, and I don't care about who I give the data to, and I don't care about anything. I only care about my payout out of my data. Now, I think this story is absolutely true in a lot of cases, but I don't think at the same time that is necessarily the regulating principle of a lot of the actions that we're seeing in the market. In other words, you cannot go around and maybe like buy votes. You cannot go around and buy people. You can do it for a short term, but in general, like it's not really sustainable as a strategy. And also like, yeah, sure, Google will be able to like buy data sets, but if there is no community at the bottom who is happy to somehow support it, you are competing for price. And if you're competing for price, history says that it's generally not a good strategy, because it's just a matter of time before someone else competes on price with you. And a price war is not going to be benefiting anyone but the data owner, which again, it's okay. But if your question is, does Google have an advantage over anyone else? I mean, of course they do, right? Like, because they're big, but I wouldn't say that their ability of going around and buy data sets here and there from individual users without necessarily making this um, making this data like I don't think Google can indefinitely go around and buy data tokens from everyone. And this is one part of the answer. The second part of the answer is sort of the opposite of what I just said, which is, even if they do that, right? The question is, where is this data originated, right? And you can, in these data tokens, perhaps we figure that the evolution of these data tokens will be adding a sort of referral fees that, let's say I am a bank. I mean, the bank is not a great example here, but I am a small startup and a small neobank, and I bring 1 million users to my platform, and this million user generates some million data tokens, and Google wants to access that, right? I can get, like, the data token can also give some level of referral fee to this neobank. And so it's true that Google will come and pay for the data, but instead of buying this data from like data aggregators in the market that are somehow extrapolating data, like, who would benefit from that? Like, the neobank would benefit because they would get a referral fee. The user would get value by either money or value on the platform, and Google would get the data. So in the current model, the same thing happens, but no one benefits from that aside of the final player. Yeah, so I think, again, I think it's too early to say what cooperative models will derive, and I think the point of having big companies end up buying majority is definitely valid. But just remember that there are two levels of incentives here. The first level is a application layer, which is what you described. The second is at network level, and I think it will be very, very hard to win incentives at both layers by just throwing money. Yeah.
I mean, I think you mentioned a good point, that it depends on the data. Not everyone is willing to sell all aspects of their data for money. You know, for instance, I'm willing to sell to advertisers, you know, my interest in what kind of food I like, because, okay, great, I'll see commercials for food I like. But when it comes to health data, I might be less willing to sell my health data because that's something I want to protect more. Now, every person, that's personal. Every person, I guess, in this system will be able to attach, you know, how private they want each piece of data to be, how willing they are to sell. And so when we talk about health data, because a lot of people don't realize this. And I was just speaking yesterday to Dr. Samantha Nazareth of Medime, who I believe also partners with the Oasis Network, that while there is doctor-patient confidentiality, you know, if I go to a doctor and they find something wrong with me, they can't tell anyone. But if my Apple Watch or my Fitbit or any of my medical device trackers, that data is owned by the company and free to sell. And I think that a lot of people don't realize this. So as we see the growth of Internet of Things and fitness health tracking devices, this is a whole new group of data that could be maybe not wanting to be sold by users, but utilized in a different way. Can you see a future where even the health network, you know, our medical records are owned by the user and not sold, but controlled and utilized in some different way besides monetization?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is, and we already have like things in place on the healthcare. I mean, clearly healthcare and health data has been something where companies have been approaching us for like some level of different needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
I still remember one of the first use cases that came to us knocking our door at the very beginning was like some pharma companies were saying, we have a big need, right? Like making a new drug takes us, I don't know, like I'm throwing numbers, like $10 billion and 10 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are totally fine with the $10 billion, but if we move the development to 5 years instead of 10 years, that's a massive improvement from us, right?
Yeah.
How do you do it? You do it with accessing better data, more data, users data,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, so like to merge the two last questions, you have why big giants will not get everything, and second, like what are the examples in the use cases in healthcare where this can revolutionize stuff? As you said, you are not, I mean, you may not feel great at selling everything to Google or like whatever entity if it's not their domain of expertise. And this goes back to my first point, which was data tokens can actually build better data collaborations between companies and users, because I think the tendency of people will be less, like people will be less interested in sharing healthcare data with Google and advertising data with an healthcare company. And it's possible that there's and 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 so there are two scenarios. Either those two companies will have to think way more about the value they're giving the users in exchange of this data, and maybe like Google will have to double down on healthcare, and that's great for everyone. In that case, they deserve the data. Or user will say, I only give my data to two buckets. One is like the one that has financial return, and maybe I give my Spotify data there because possibly I is less sensitive. Like maybe I get also better recommendation. I don't know. I also like it. But for what concerns my more like financial data and my healthcare data, maybe this data is gonna go like on a separate path, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, on the healthcare side, we are seeing a lot of requests for uh, needs of creating better collaborations between patients and doctors or researchers. Um, there are a lot of questions there on how to acquire data, because without the collaboration of the hospital, it's really hard to get the data. So something has to change there, and this goes back to the incentives. But I want to spend 1 minute, if it's okay for you, talking about two use cases that we have in the healthcare
Sure.
space. The first one is a large insurance provider in the US, one of the largest, that clearly owns the patients and also owns the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the hospital that are organizing a network that collaborates with this insurance provider, right? There is a big need of sharing information on a daily basis. But what happens when the hospital shares the data with the insurance provider, right? They lose their competitive advantage, because like at that point, the insurance providers will have money, users, like patients and data, right?
Yeah.
And the hospital just becomes a service provider, but once the service is done, like no one cares.
Yeah.
So what they are using our product for is really creating, let's call it a sandbox for a second. It's a wrong definition, but really like this space where everyone can collaborate on the same data. Everyone dumps the data in a privacy preserving way. And there are two big advantages. One is that there's no data owner, so everyone can query the data and get some output, right? According to policies that are specified based on what they need for their job. And the second is that you can set different level of permissions, like maybe an admin doesn't have to see everything that a doctor needs to see, and a more senior doctor can see even more. Like I don't know what policies they're specifying because they're private and they stay with them. But you get the idea of this network that is creating around information. How you get the sense, I think now you can get a sense of how the old model and the new model enable completely different cooperative models between the entities and the participants of that network. The second example that is more public is this company called Nebula Genomics. And at their core, they are a version of 23andMe. So they do DNA tests. But the unique thing that they have is that they have a flow for people that who want to keep their privacy alive, let's say. And so they don't want to share the results of the DNA test with all the entities and the company itself. So what they do is that they receive the data lives in their own capsule, and then they decide whether they want to allow Nebula to actually compute on this data or not. But even if Nebula computes on this data for some research or whatever they want to do, the actual data and DNA test stays with the user, never leaves, and is never accessed by Nebula. So the Nebula company will never be able to leak this information to the market. And 20 years from now, no one can come to you and say, you know what, we got your DNA data 20 years ago, and it seems that you cannot be the CEO of this company because you are 61% to develop this form of disease, and we don't want that in our company. So bye-bye, right? That would not be possible.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about data, and especially today, it seems like most of the time where it comes to the everyday person, they're usually not thinking about data. When do they think about data? Is when you hear about these big hacks. 300 million users' data leaked and sold on the dark web, and so I think, and so the way the system's set up now, and I'm sure you know better than me, the way the system's set up now is that every data, every platform has a password, and they're in charge of protecting that data. So PayPal has to protect my PayPal data, and Google has to protect my Google data, and I have a different password for all of them, and they could get hacked. And once we turn into this world of tokenizing data, where each even data point is protected in and of itself, it has its own, like you mentioned, it has its own properties, each data point itself. Can we see a future where there is no longer, this, I need a password for everything, I need to have to worry about getting hacked, because each data point itself is protected by the blockchain. Each data point itself is its own entity that is assigned to you and can only be used by you or by each data point has permissions attached to it. So will the whole data world look different, where it's no longer data set on that database with in the hands of PayPal that has to protect it? Talking about it in a protection and a security sense of data.
Right, that's exactly right. So you describe it perfectly. So the way I see it is, there is the internet layer, and again, this is not perfect, but there is the internet layer, and then there are databases on top, and then you can also argue that it's the other way around, where there are databases and then internet on top.
Connecting them.
Yeah, you can make whatever you want, but the point is there are separate layers that are silos on top of each other, right? Now, when you consider this, let me try to draw an analogy that I'm working on now and see if that works. So when you look at Compound, right, the most beautiful part that a protocol like Compound and DeFi space brought with this incredible job that they've done is they essentially created a liquidity network or a liquidity layer that is kind of available to everyone who wants to incorporate the Compound protocol in their own application. So right now, if I add support for PayPal in my mobile app, I get the functionality, but I don't necessarily get the liquidity layer that they have. I need to, PayPal is a way of paying, but it's not embedded. The liquidity is not embedded in the integration with PayPal. When I think of Compound, I think of this protocol that is transparent. I don't even have to say that I'm using Compound, being an app on top. And I have immediate access to all the liquidity that is allocated on Compound. So when I open my mobile application that is built on Compound, I can display all the numbers and all the liquidity and all the interest rates and all the fees and all the health of their protocol as if it was my application, right? I would probably have to say that at the bottom layer is compound, but I have immediate access to that liquidity layer. And that's an immense advantage for someone who wants to build an application on top. If we translate this into data, it would be sort of the same thing, right? If you integrate our protocol, again, this is like a little bit of a tomorrow's vision, right? If you integrate our protocol and you build your application on top of our protocol, there has to be a way to immediately access that data liquidity that lives as a layer on our network. There are policies, there are user consent, there are all these aspects for sure, but there is going to be a communication layer now between the application itself and the data owners, which is the biggest innovation that we are trying to enable as a layer one company for now, right?
Wow, I mean that's really I never thought about it that way. That does sound like the very exciting and way more usable. I didn't realize how easy it'd be to access. In my mind, I was thinking, oh, everyone would have to go to the Oasis network, but once you integrate the network into applications themselves, everyone has direct access. I mean, it's just another thing. It's so crazy. It's such a new technology, blockchain in general that we're speaking about here, that the possibilities every day continue to pop up that didn't exist yesterday. And so it's really exciting to see. And I'm assuming that part of what enables this is you guys actually separate the consensus and the execution into two layers. Is that what it enables this? I mean, I know alongside that, we're talking about if we want this to succeed, it has to scale. All these ideas are so great and they have to scale. And so does separating the consensus and the execution in two layers, is that a scaling solution, or is that also enable, like you're saying, integration with allowing access to certain things without others?
Yeah. So yeah, there are two reasons why our network is separating these layers, the compute layer and the consensus layer, essentially. So the easiest way, the easiest answer here is that when you have a set of tasks that you need to perform, no matter what they are, if you can parallelize some of these tasks, your network will be faster, right? And that's kind of intuitive. So the core reason behind this choice is that really, like, why did you need to execute these tasks in a sequence when you can parallelize them? And that's why that's the very first principle. But then along while we're building this network, we also realized that having one runtime that needs to support every time, that needs to support every kind of application wasn't really the best choice, because we often spend a lot of time thinking, if we take this choice, we will be very well suited for this use case, but if we take this other choice, we will not be suited for this use case and we'll be suited for this other use case, right? But we are a layer one blockchain. We can't really take this decision too early on. It would be counterproductive to do it, because if there's one thing that we learn is that things keep evolving at an incredible pace, and closing doors is not really like what we should be doing as a layer one. So we enable this architecture of parallel runtimes, hence paratimes, that can be spun off by every developer with the characteristics and the features that are most or like the best suit the application that developer is trying to build. Some developers will have a need of entirely private transactions. Some other will want an EVM, Ethereum virtual machine compatible runtime. Someone will want both, right? Someone will want confidentiality and EVM compatibility. Someone will want to be more decentralized. Someone will want to be less decentralized. So our consensus layer is fully decentralized, and we're starting with like an impressive number of 70 nodes since day zero, and I think that has been really incredible. But the compute layer can be also decentralized as you want or as you wish. And those were the two high-level reasons behind this very unique choice, and which has become something we strongly believe in now.
Mm-hmm.
We're already seeing the benefit of that.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think, all you have to do is look at the success of Ethereum to realize kind of how important it is to be versatile, because they're stuck. And what do I mean by that? That Ethereum has been so successful, so much DeFi has been built upon it, that, and obviously everyone knew that at a certain point it couldn't scale. And so that's why from the beginning they wanted to go ETH 2.0 with sharding. But they become so successful now that they're not able to move over to ETH 2.0 as quickly as they'd like. They're so rigid because they're in charge of so much assets that they can't, be versatile like they wanted to. If there wasn't value on as much value on Ethereum, ETH 2.0 probably would have launched already, or last year or 2 years ago. But they have to be so careful. So, so kudos to you guys for recognizing even beforehand that it's better to not close the doors, be versatile. This way you could adjust, even if one power time and one use case becomes super successful and there's tons of assets, you're still able to make changes on the other power times and be flexible and versatile to those needs. So my question to you here is, do you think Ethereum is kind of not cursed or being punished for being so successful at the beginning, that they're kind of they're stuck, they can't adjust with the times as well as more versatile projects like yourself?
I mean, I of course I love to think that, because that's what we believe in, right? And clearly this will be the endless fight between the first mover and the second mover advantage. And it's pretty clear the first mover advantage has some advantages, the second mover advantage has a different set of advantages. So you can I don't think we'll get to like a final conclusion on which one is the winner. I'd say maybe what I really love to think is that blockchain is not really like a network of competing networks, but it should be a network of cooperating networks. So I don't really recall any conversation inside Oasis where Ethereum and competitor were used in the same sentence. I strongly think that each network will find some level of will find like their own place based on what they do, but there's going to be a lot of cooperation between networks to be each other's a layer 2 for another one, and vice versa. So like right now, if you think of the short term, like Ethereum is great for liquidity, it's not great for privacy, it's not great for scalability yet. And other companies are great for scalability, are not great for privacy. Other companies are great for scalability, but just in the sense of transactions per second, but they don't capture complexity of the transaction. Like if it's like they don't distinguish between a send like a transfer of money between you and I and like a deep learning model, right? They all count as one transaction, while we think this is not really correct. So anyway, I think the long story short here is that networks will be forced to find their own place and to cooperate more than like seeing who's first, who's second, because everyone will have one advantage at different point in time that someone else doesn't have, because of like one entity has too much liquidity, one entity doesn't have liquidity, one end has usage and one doesn't, and will be something like that. The other thing that I want to say about Ethereum is that I don't really follow their development too much. But the one thing that I struggle to see is that they are not really a company. They are a great network of people and a community. But I've been hearing a lot of like side chats where people were saying that one of the challenges of Ethereum is that not having a core team that works together as a company and not having like a formal structure a little bit is causing some issues to them and is delaying stuff. So let's see how that plays out. I think, yeah, I'm interested also in this aspect of Ethereum, not just on the like pure like code deployment.
Interesting. Well, I guess time will tell. So the only answer, let's check back in a year or a couple of years. All right, this is the Halloween special Tales from the Crypto. So we're asking every interviewee to share their scariest blockchain or crypto stories. Do you got any for us?
Yeah, I have one. So at the beginning of this talk, I said that the first time I looked at Bitcoin was 2013, and at that time I was working for American Express, and that was my very first job. I mean, I started my own company, but that was my first time in a large corporation as an intern back in time, in my first time at Amex. And I look at this Bitcoin, and clearly as a very motivated intern in that company, I was doing a good job. I was trying to do a good job, but also I was trying to impress my VPs, right? And so the way to impress your VPs is generally doing a good job, plus coming up with some level of innovation. But at that time, I went to my VP and said, listen, I found this like Bitcoin thing. I don't know what that is, but do you want me to spend like a few hours per week just to tell you what that is, right? Like I put together a few documents, I say what this is, etc. And it's like Bitcoin was at probably $100 or $200 at that time, and I said like, and I got a no. I got a strong no, because like what this is, like, a no clue. I don't want to spend time on that. Like 2 months later was like no longer 200, but maybe 400. Usage was there, and I went back and said, listen, like you told me this would crash, but it didn't, and it's still there. What happens, right? And anyway, and this person told me, yeah, no, I don't want to do it. This, like, you know how many of these I've seen? They all fail, they all die, nothing. And I ended up believing them because, you know, they have 35 years of experience in the payment industry, and I had probably 35 days of experience at that point. And I said, yeah, you know. So I think my scary story is that had it not been for them, I would have probably been like super rich by now. So the maybe that's an advice more than anything else, and it's like, yeah, I think it's fun to play around a little bit, even when other people say, no, don't do it. Maybe there is a middle ground of like, just try a little bit and see what happens there.
Well, great. Well, I mean, I'm on one part of me, I'm sad for you that you haven't been able to get super rich from getting into Bitcoin. But on the other end, I'm happy because maybe if you would have hit it big, I wouldn't be able to speak to you today. Luca, it was really wonderful speaking to you. That, you know, I appreciate you taking the time, giving some insights, you know, into what the future of data might look like. So I really do appreciate you sitting down with us today. And for all of our viewers here at Reimagine 2020, I'm Yonah Hochhauser. Thanks for watching.